Hi, my name is Carla and I am a certified peer support specialist. I've been with PeerStar since 2011. I'm also a certified peer support specialist supervisor. I'm also a pastor's wife, and I am in part-time ministry. I grew up in a very small town in Amesbury, Pennsylvania. One way in, one way out. And it was a really interesting childhood. There were about 20 houses, had a very small Methodist church and a rod and gun club. We had a lot of kids in the town, probably like 15 of us, all within, 5 years apart. So we had fun. We would sleep outside on one another's porches, and during the summer we would run into the woods, we'd play. The thing was, though, with the town was there was a lot of alcoholism in the town with the dads. The arguing that would happen behind closed doors in the families was really hard. Parents arguing because, none of the moms drank, and it was all the dads. They'd get drunk, and then our parents would argue. My father was diagnosed in 1983 with schizophrenia. There was a lot of uncertainty. My father he was an amazing dad. He taught me work ethic. He taught me, what it meant to be an adult. He taught me so much, and such a brilliant man. When I was 10 years old, my mother apparently some of the kids in the neighborhood had heard that I wasn't my dad's real daughter biologically. And I remember sitting down and my mom saying to me, "Carla, your dad is not your real dad. Your biological father didn't want you, and he didn't want me, and we're never going to talk about it again." Oh, I just felt crushed. I just felt like somebody kicked me in the gut. Yeah, it does, because looking back, my mom, the only reason she ever told me that was that she was dealing with her own shame, leftover shame as a result of the situation. But she was only trying to protect me, and having to live with that, to not be able to tell my siblings that, her carrying that secret as long as she had to carry that. But there's just total forgiveness there. And that being said, though, as a teenager, I learned how to play the game without them even realizing what I was doing. I learned how to manipulate early on. Started to smoke at the age of 11. I would steal my dad's cigarette butts out of the bathroom. And that started a really, really bad path of, lying to get my own way and lying to make people feel bad for me. And I started hanging out with the wrong kids in school. So I was 17. And these older guys were from Portage, and they were like 24, 25. And the one guy was interested in me, and 24 years old, it was nothing. That's what what I mean. 1987, that it wasn't looked upon, the way it should have been. And we were at the one guy's house, and we were drinking, and they had some cocaine, and they asked me if I wanted to do any, and I was like, yeah, sure. Here I am, 17, alone with these two men, that I really didn't know that well. And so the one guy was like, "Hey, let's make a pact with Satan, and let's do this." And I was like, "Okay." I'm like, "What do we need to do?" And so we took a razor blade and just like cut our fingers, and went like this with the blood, made a blood pact with Satan. We were drawing upside down crosses on this paper. It was, but to me, like, these guys liked me. So it didn't matter, I was going to do whatever it took. Never once did it occur to me that, dude, this is like some serious heavy stuff. You shouldn't be doing this stuff. Never once, never crossed my mind. All that mattered to me was, here I am in this kitchen, snorting coke, drinking, making a blood pact with Satan, and it never fazed me. I knew at some point I had to figure out what I was going to do with my life. And in the summer, I talked to a Navy recruiter about going into the Navy. And I went to basic training in October of 1989. I went to Florida. But then, prior to graduation, we would get Liberty. And so we were able to go out, for the weekends. And so I immediately gravitated immediately gravitated towards the people who partied. And then they were sending me to California for my schooling. So I'm waiting for orders. And of course, this girl says to me, hey, you want to go, let's go out on the beach and let's party, because she was waiting on the same orders. And so we go to Mission Beach, we meet these guys, and we end up going in. We go partying with them. We're using methamphetamines. This is 1989 on the West Coast. Methamphetamine was a very popular drug then. And so then the next day, we go home in the morning, and she must have told somebody. The next thing you know, the master of arms comes in, puts me in handcuffs, takes me out, and takes me to a holding area where I have to be drug tested. I was received an other than honorable discharge. It was probably in July. In July, I ended up, flying home back to my parents' house. I got my first job at Eaton Park Restaurant. I was a third shift waitress, and I met my first husband, and then we got married, and we had 3 kids by the time I was 24 years old. I didn't use drugs when my kids were little. I didn't drink whenever my kids were little. Emotionally, I was very immature because I just didn't have, I wasn't grown up. So I was clean until my oldest son was, this one it gets rough. 1995 it started, where their dad and I were back and forth. We were together, not together, but together, not together. And we wanted a fresh start, so we moved to North Carolina. Things fell apart while we were there, and I was dealing with some issues, and yeah. I cry because of how it affected my kids. And so he ended up moving back to Pennsylvania, and I stayed in North Carolina. My mom had actually had our kids from February until the summer, and then they came back to North Carolina with me for a while in the summer, and I couldn't handle 3 little kids, and so they went back to Pennsylvania with him, and in October of that same year, I woke up one morning and I looked at their picture and I was like, I can't do this to them. They deserved it better. And so I called my parents, and they came down and got me that weekend. So in 2004, I got involved with this guy, and he introduced me to pain pills. I started buying pills and lying to him about how much I was buying, and those pills, that's when I crossed over into opiate addiction. I was working in a personal care home, and I started stealing. I was diverting medication from this man who he didn't take all of his pills. The owner of the personal care home, we had been friends from childhood. He was one of my friends growing up, and they didn't press charges. They asked me if I did it, and I don't remember. I probably lied and said no. I probably did, because that would have been the typical what I would have done. But I remember they fired me, obviously, and the hardest thing about that situation was the fact that I lost that relationship. I was hired for this North American Communications in Duncansville, and I was hired to work on the floor, and met this guy in AA, and we ended up working together, and he relapsed, and so then I relapsed. And it was a Friday afternoon. I didn't have any pills, and I knew I was starting to get shaky. And at this point, I had been promoted. I'd been working in the office, and I was doing interviewing. I was their recruiter. And I remember calling a second shift supervisor. I knew his wife had had surgery. Hey, I know your wife just had surgery. Does she have any pain pills left? He didn't even know what to say. We ended up hanging up, and I walked into my job that Monday morning. They pulled me into her office. It was two people from HR and then the owner, they let me go, and they paid me some severance, and best thing that could have ever happened. So on March 19th of that same year, and I went into my bathroom and I was like, "You'll stop tomorrow." And I remember looking into my eyes, and I heard, and to this day nobody will ever convince me otherwise, I heard the voice of God say so clearly to my soul, "No, you won't. This thing has you." And in that moment, I knew that if I continued on the path I was on, those 3 kids that were upstairs were going to be without a mom. I started going to meetings, and I latched on to this woman, and I latched on to what these women and these people in recovery were talking about. I stopped comparing. I stopped looking at men. I started focusing on me, and I knew that if my life didn't change, my kids' lives weren't going to change, you know. So I am like in church, I'm going to meetings, I'm going to Bible studies, I'm in therapy, I'm in drug and alcohol therapy, I'm getting ready to, I'm doing inner child healing work, you know, I'm having family meetings with my kids, you know, like we were busy, you know, I did a lot, working steps, you know, I did a lot of work in my early sobriety. So I had met my husband in AA. He heard me say that I had aspired to be the Proverbs 31 woman. We had stayed after a meeting on a Saturday night, and we shared one another's stories, one another's testimonies, how we came to faith in Christ, and you know where our lives were at as far as serving in faith at that point. It's really funny because in May of that year, I had written this letter to God, and you know, Lord, if it's ever your will for me to have a man in my life, these are the 12 characteristics I'm looking for. A couple weeks later, I was getting ready for church, and I open up this drawer and I pull this letter out, and I'm reading over it, and I'm like, oh my word, like he fit all 12 characteristics. That was him. On Thanksgiving of that year, he asked my kids if he can marry me, and then he asked me to marry him, and on December 23rd of the same year, we got married. So in September of 2015, I started my own. You know, I started a soul care ministry and started taking women through the same process, and you know, and was very blessed that God gave me the ability to discern what is mental illness and what is out of the spiritual realm. And that's been an amazing journey itself. And I just applied for licensure within my denomination, and I'm almost done with my, you know, done with school. But, you know, working for Pure Star has been amazing. I love Pure Star, you know, and the reason I love Pure Star is because they have been amazing with me. You know, where else can you work in a job that you can make your own schedule? Where else can you work in a job where you can have recovery support? Where else can you work? What other company can you work for when your regional director and the vice president of your company it tells you that you're an inspiration to them? Life is amazing today. Like, I have absolutely nothing to complain about. And I didn't deserve this life, you know? I didn't deserve this life. When I think about, you know, my favorite Bible verse in here, and I'm going to read it. I know it well, but I'm still going to read it. And it's Romans 8:28, and it says, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him and who have been called according to his purpose." So everything that went wrong in my life, everything bad, God took it and is now using it for his purpose. Because I've been able to heal from all of that, and have now been able to walk people through their own healing. That's good stuff. I could have never done that